Good afternoon. The Subcommittee for Indigenous Peoples of the United States will now come to order. The subcommittee is meeting today to hear testimony around examining federal facilities in Indian country. Under Committee Rule 4F, any opening statements, oral opening statements at hearings are limited to the chair and the ranking minority member. This allows us to hear from our witnesses sooner and helps members keep to their schedules. Therefore, I ask unanimous consent that all other members' opening statements be made part of the hearing record if they are submitted to the clerk by 5 p.m. today or the close of the hearing, whichever comes first. Hearing no objection, so ordered. Without objection, the chair may also declare a recess, subject to the call of the chair. Hearing no objection, so ordered. As described in the hearing notice, statements, documents, or motions must be submitted to the electronic repository at hnrcdocs@mail.house.gov. Additionally, please note that as with in-person meetings, members are responsible for their own microphones. As with our in-person meetings, members can be muted by staff only to avoid inadvertent background noise. Finally, members or witnesses experiencing technical problems should inform committee staff immediately. I will begin by recognizing myself for my opening statement. So today's subcommittee hearing will focus on examining federal facilities in Indian country. We've had a national discussion for several months now over the need to rebuild the nation's failing infrastructure. We recognize that our nation is not competitive, our people are not safe, and our economies are hurt if we don't invest in our infrastructure. And if we do invest, we are also investing in our future, we are investing in job creation and boosting our economic growth. Those same arguments for investing in our national infrastructure are the same, but more fundamental and more consequential in Indian country. The national average age for hospital facilities in the United States is about 10.6. It's about 40 years for Indian health service facilities, and 52% of those facilities are grossly undersized. They are crowded and unsafe. The pandemic made us painfully aware of how the shortage of IHS facilities led to some of the highest levels of death for Native Americans from COVID-19. Indeed, at the current rates of funding for IHS, if a new facility were built today, it would not be replaced for an additional 400 years. That means multiple generations seeking healthcare in an outdated, sometimes unsafe facility. The pandemic also shone its unforgiving light on the plight of Native American children who didn't have access to broadband to attend school remotely. But when those children return to school, they are often learning in buildings that are leaking, that deserve to be condemned, and that have been sitting on priority rating lists for years. I have visited and sat down in many of such buildings, and it is simply not right. It is a travesty. For some context, the BIA, BIE, and IHS collectively operate or fund 1,834 federal facilities ranging from fire stations, garage, warehouses, communication repeaters, and utility plants to hospitals, clinics, and schools. Most of which are in dire need of repair. In 2018, the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights concluded that Congress must fully fund tribal law enforcement agencies, tribal courts, and tribal detention facilities to allow those criminal justice components to fulfill their responsibilities to tribal citizens. We have heard recently, and we'll continue to hear, and we'll hear questions today posed to us from across Indian country about the need to also link up those detention facilities with medical facilities to provide the kind of healthcare that is needed in order to save lives. So another bit of context is that if we were to address the facilities backlogs and federally funded facilities in the Indian country, the federal government would need at least $56 billion to address the backlogs and deferred maintenance across BIA, BIE, and IHS. I know I just gave you a lot of numbers, but I think it's important that we quantify this enormous problem. And let's remember that for every BIE facility, there are dozens of students curious and eager to learn, and for every IHS facility, there are mothers, fathers, and elders that are in need of care. As you will hear today from our witnesses, there is a need for long-lasting and continuous investments for federal facilities in Indian country. These investments can last generations and begin to finally heal the disparities we witnessed throughout the pandemic. Tribes, tribal advocates, the Governor Accountability Office, and even the Department of Interior itself have recognized these issues for years, but still, nothing's been done. We cannot let today's hearing become another footnote in a future report or hearing. We must use this opportunity to not just develop the record, but also to act and push to get full appropriation to build these facilities as part of the American Jobs Plan, as part of any infrastructure plan. To fail is to ignore the first American. To fail is to ignore yet again our trust responsibilities. We must not fail. As I've said before, we are at a unique moment in history where we can have a lasting impact on Indigenous communities' future, on their infrastructure, on their opportunities. I look forward to the subcommittee and the full committee support for these vital infrastructure projects. Our distinguished witnesses will highlight these needs and tell stories that will spur us to action. I now recognize Ranking Member Young for his opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank to the witnesses for being here today, although it's virtual. You mentioned today's hearing is being held to examine federal facilities in Indian country. As I've said before, quality infrastructure is critically important to every part of this great nation. But I can see that potential economic development that communities, rural villages could achieve if they were given the resources to put ideas into action. Nowhere is infrastructure more important than our native communities. The Bureau of Indian Affairs, the Indian Health Service are the primary agency charged with providing services to tribal communities. Unfortunately, many facilities in tribal communities are in dire need of replacement, as you mentioned, Madam Chair, or need extensive repair and maintenance. On April 21st, 2021 hearing, this subcommittee heard firsthand the dramatic needs in sanitation facilities investment. The IHS Sanitation Facility Construction Program currently has a backlog of more than $2 billion. That's billion, not million. I am proud to be the co-sponsor of a bill with Mr. Holloran who would address this backlog. In addition, Indian Healthcare Facilities Construction Program has a 2.2. You add that up, that's about 4.2 trillion backlog. That's not new construction, that's backlog of maintenance and new construction. At the Bureau of Indian Affairs, public safety and law enforcement related infrastructure is inadequate. There's a few examples that barely scratch the surface on need in the Indian country. Earlier this year, I had the privilege of attending a productive meeting in the Oval Office with President Biden on infrastructure. I share optimism. There's an appetite for bipartisanship. I'd appreciate he listened to my ideas on the scope of the bill and funding mechanism. As I've said before, we must be cautious about the goals of this bill and with a very definition of infrastructure. We must make sure that the bill is paid for. Both sides must be willing to set aside sacred cows and collaborate for the good of the American people in this bill to come together. If there's no serious funding source, though, we'll not have a serious bill. We've gone through 3 of those bills and did really very little. Most importantly, we have to listen to the tribes, find out what they want. There's a number of ways that Congress can improve infrastructure beyond just injecting billions in budget accounts. Many tribes, and I have it in Alaska, they show they're better equipped to manage federal programs and the infrastructure it supports. Indian Self-Government Act is a powerful tool that more and more tribes are using because they know what is best for their communities and their tribes. Native communities should continue to design and build programs and facilities that work for them, and Congress and administration should partner with them in these efforts. My hope is that we work together in a bipartisan way to really do some good, not simply put another ban on an Indian country infrastructure. In closing, I'm pleased that after nearly 6 months, we are joined here today from officials of the administration. I again want to thank the witnesses, thank the chairman. I look forward to hearing from the testimony from these witnesses today. With that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
It's not a muting. Thank you so much, Ranking Member. Wise words, and I do agree with you on the importance of first fully funding these facilities so that then they may be contracted and compacted with under self-determination, but already funded. We also have today with us the chairman of the full committee, Chairman Raul Grijalva. Chairman, would you like to
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the courtesy, and let me thank you personally and the ranking member, Mr. Young, personally, for, I know these have been issues since your arrival. That was one of the first items that you brought up in our discussions, and Mr. Young has historically been an advocate for the discussion that we're having today, and I want to thank you for that. It's an important hearing about these federal facilities in Indian country. This constant underfunding of federal facilities in Indian country is well documented and well known to tribes and those that work with tribes. And in my district alone, there's been road closures due to flooding, school closures. In the state, the Pima Indian Medical Center closed the labor and delivery section not too long ago. And there's overcrowding and substandard detention facilities across the country that are a source of inefficiencies and for both the prisoners, the detainees, the staff, and the overall security. And you mentioned the dated and inadequate health facilities that we have across Indian country. This underfunding is particularly glaring given the fact that we have a trust responsibility, which does include the consistent and adequate and continuous investments in federal facilities and infrastructure for Indian country. And I think the topics today are appropriate. The investments that you talked about, Madam Chair, in education, healthcare, and the well-being of Indigenous people in this country are long, long overdue. And I'm looking forward to, Madam Chair, and thank you again for holding this hearing. Looking forward to your committee's recommendations and the FYI 22 proposed Biden Interior Department proposed budget, and where there are gaps in it to make the recommendations to correct them, as Mr. Young so eloquently stated. And with that, Madam Chair, thank you so much, and I yield back.
Thank you so much, Chairman Grijalva. Now I would like to transition to our first panel of witnesses for today. Under our committee rules, oral statements are limited to 5 minutes, but you may submit a longer written statement for the record if you choose, and we have received your longer statements and are appreciative of them. When you begin, the on-screen timer will begin counting down and will turn orange when you have 1 minute remaining. I recommend that members and witnesses joining remotely use the grid view so that they may lock the timer on their screen. When you go over the allotted time, I will ask you, hopefully gently, to please wrap up your statement. After your testimony is complete, please remember to mute yourself to avoid any inadvertent background noise. I will allow the entire panel to testify before we question the witnesses. The chair now recognizes Mr. Randy Grinnell, who is the Deputy Director for Management Operations at Indian Health Service. Mr. Grinnell, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and Ranking Member Young and the members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on the Indian Health Services federal facilities in Indian country. Indian healthcare facilities are provided in over 687 IHS owned, leased, or tribally owned healthcare facilities, mostly in rural and isolated areas, and 41 urban Indian organizations operated out of 77 locations. Total space in the real property inventory is just over 25 million square feet, with the government owning 60% and the tribes owning 40%. IHS also operates about 2,200 staff quarter units in remote locations. For many American Indian and Alaska Native people, IHS is the only source of health care. Healthcare services are constrained by the limited capacities of existing IHS and tribal healthcare facilities. There's a great need to expand, renovate, or replace many aging facilities. The average age of IHS healthcare facilities is greater than 37 years old, compared to 9 to 10 years in the private sector. Due to increasing user populations and not enough space, facilities are overcrowded, which impedes access to health care and impacts the ability for us and tribes to recruit and retain healthcare providers. When a facility is replaced, the new one is 3 to 4 times larger than the old one. Total need for the healthcare facilities construction program is about $14.5 billion for expanded and active authority facility types, according to the 2016 IHS and Tribal Healthcare Facilities Needs Assessment Report to Congress. An update to that report, early drafts are showing an increase of up to $22 billion now to meet that need. Current law requires the IHS to complete the 93 healthcare facilities construction priority list before spending appropriated funding on additional construction projects. IHS has now completed 37 projects, with 12 remaining on the list. With the remaining projects have received some level of funding, and there's still over $2.1 billion remaining to be funded as of 2020. This cost estimate does not consider the staffing and operating cost for each of these facilities. Two of the larger facilities that remain on the list, the Phoenix Indian Medical Center and the Gallup Indian Medical Center, face great challenges incorporating improvements in healthcare delivery models and medical technology. IHS estimates the replacement cost for PIMC to be $674 million and the replacement cost for the Gallup facility to be $552 million. The IHS effort to improve its electronic health record system underscores the need to replace outdated facilities. Aging medical facilities impede medical innovation, and modern hospitals contain an extensive amount of complex equipment with high electrical requirements. In terms of medical and lab equipment, IHS and tribal programs have not been able to keep pace. Medical and lab equipment, which has an average useful life of 6 to 8 years, generally is used twice as much in the IHS facilities. IHS and tribal programs manage about 90,000 devices that are valued at about $700 million. Regular replacement of these beyond their useful life would cost at least $100 million per year. So maintaining aging buildings and equipment continues to be a major challenge. Out-of-date facilities and equipment also create challenges for retaining and recruiting high-quality healthcare professionals. The lack of sufficient resources to address ongoing facility and operation needs also compromise healthcare. The current backlog for IHS and tribal facilities is now over $945 million. The Sanitation Facilities Construction Program, which is an integral component of IHS disease prevention activities since 1959, has used funds appropriated to provide water and wastewater disposal facilities for eligible homes and communities. During 2020, 373 projects to address these needs were funded at $220 million using IHS and contributed funds. Once constructed, they'll benefit 143,000 people. Total sanitation facility needs reported through the sanitation deficiency system has increased to over $3.09 billion. Across the Indian healthcare system, additional funding is needed to hire essential staff to carry out work associated with healthcare facility construction, sanitation facilities construction, maintenance and improvement, and equipment. We look forward to continuing our work with our tribal and federal partners and are committed to working closely with our stakeholders to address all these needs. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you, Mr. Grinnell, for your testimony. The chair will now recognize Mr. Jason Fragge. You can correct the pronunciation, who is the Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Management at the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs. We now recognize you for 5 minutes.
Great, thank you. Chair Leger-Fernandez, Ranking Member Young, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Jason Fragge. I am Deputy Assistant Secretary for Management at the Office of Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs. And thank you for the opportunity to present testimony today. The FY 2022 President's Budget lays out the important role that Indian Affairs will play to move infrastructure forward in Indian country. Complementing this request is the President's American Jobs Plan, which provides a longer-term strategy to create millions of good-paying jobs and rebuild our country's infrastructure. It is impossible to talk about infrastructure without addressing land. Indian Affairs is focused on strengthening tribal sovereignty over homelands and includes $150 million in the 2022 budget to reestablish the Indian Land Consolidation Program in the Bureau of Indian Affairs to reduce land fractionation and support climate adaptation. Similarly, the budget includes $10 million for land acquisition for tribes. The Education Construction Program rehabilitates schools and dormitories to provide an environment conducive to quality educational achievement. We are not only working to address deferred maintenance at BIE schools, but also targeting the goal of providing modern and culturally appropriate schools that students are proud to attend. Because of this, replacing or repairing BIE-funded schools in poor condition remains a high priority. The FY 2022 budget includes $264 million in annual funding for education construction. Education construction funds will be supplemented by mandatory funding from the Great America's Outdoors Act. With a combination of discretionary funding and Great America Outdoors Act funds enacted through FY 2022, Indian Affairs can fully fund replacement of all 10 schools in the 2016 replacement list and up to 3 additional schools. Most schools require additional in-school IT staffing to adequately support the students and faculty and maintain the school networks and computing resources. The budget includes a $20 million increase for Bureau of Indian Education IT for recurring operating costs to maintain the educational technology capacities serving our schools. BIA infrastructure ranges across a few areas. The budget includes $47.8 million for public safety and justice construction, including a $5 million increase for facility replacement and new construction. This increase is part of the administration's commitment to focus on tribal public safety. The 2022 budget provides $85 million for resource management construction. This amount includes $52.3 million for dam projects, an increase of $13.9 million, and $28.7 million for irrigation projects. BIA is also responsible for more than 29,000 miles of roads and more than 1,000 bridges. The 2022 budget includes $37.4 million for road maintenance activities. Consistent with the administration's commitment to ensure clean, safe drinking water and water infrastructure in Indian country, the 2022 budget includes an additional $29.9 million to address BIA-owned drinking and wastewater infrastructure requirements. Water settlements are an element of a proactive approach to address water availability and tribal water rights claims. The 2022 budget includes $270.2 million for Indian land and water rights settlements activities in the BIA and Bureau of Reclamation, an increase of $71.9 million. The budget also includes a proposal to reclassify funding for existing enacted water settlements from discretionary to mandatory funding status in 2023. This will provide tribal nations with certainty that these commitments will be met with a dedicated, comprehensive funding source. Section 105L leases are an increasingly important element of infrastructure investment in Indian country. The FY 2022 budget proposes $36.6 million to fund Section 105L lease agreements. The budget also includes a proposal to reclassify 105L funding from discretionary to mandatory funding status starting in 2023. Broadband deployment on tribal land continues to lag behind other areas. Indian Affairs, in coordination with other agencies, is focusing on increasing broadband access with different strategies to address this complex challenge. For our Indian Affairs facilities, we're also increasing the broadband capacity and performance. President Biden's American Jobs Plan proposes to invest tens of billions directly in tribal communities. Key goals in the plan include deployment of broadband, expansion and rehabilitation of Indian housing, providing clean and safe drinking water through direct funding and tribal set-asides with the Clean Water and Drinking Water State Revolving Funds. The plan also proposes a doubling of the Tribal Transportation Program. The plan includes a new Tribal Transition and Relocation Assistance Program to support planning and voluntary community-led transitions to those tribal communities that are most vulnerable to accelerating climate-driven disasters. Investments proposed in the FY 2022 budget and the American Jobs Plan represent an important opportunity to improve infrastructure and advance sovereignty and self-determination. Chair Ledger-Fernandez, Ranking Member Young, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify. I'd be honored to answer any questions you may have.
I thank the first panel of witnesses for the testimonies. I'm going to remind the members that Committee Rule 3D imposes a 5-minute limit on questions. The chair will now begin recognizing members for questions we may wish to ask the witnesses. I will begin by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. I really want to thank the witnesses for the descriptions of the needs that really are not simply the construction dollars, but we need the operation dollars, the management dollars, and how so many of the different infrastructure needs are interconnected, because we need the broadband to be able to get that into the schools and into the hospitals. But it's also not really possible for tribal communities to thrive unless they have all aspects, from clean water to broadband to health and school facilities. Deputy Assistant Secretary Fragge, in your testimony, you note that BIA is working to address 13 BIA schools. I think you said you had enough for 10 from the 2016 list, plus another 3. But we also know that there are a total of 73 BIA schools in poor condition that you don't currently have the funds necessary for major replacement or repair projects. What I want to ask you, I'll ask the questions all at once. So what infrastructural deficiencies define a BIA school as being in poor condition? And how are we going to, what is the plan for addressing this backlog? And I'll leave it at that, because I know we all understand that the poor condition of the BIA schools is going to obviously impact the student population, their ability to learn.
Great, thank you very much. The overall deferred maintenance level for BIE schools is over $800 million, but I think it's important to note that that really just reflects addressing deferred maintenance. That doesn't mean it's a modern, fully culturally appropriate school that the children are proud to attend. So our goal is a little bit higher. As you noted, we have the ability within the 22 request to complete the funding for the final school on the 2016 list. And then we're moving forward and funding 3 additional schools. There are 73 schools remaining that are in poor condition. It costs us on average about $62.2 million to replace a school. And so for those 73 remaining, that full cost would be about $4.5 billion. In terms of the plan, one of the things that we put in place over the last 2 years is we initiated a new site assessment and capital investment plan that creates a data-driven, transparent process that allows us to identify and prioritize the schools that we're addressing. So it's known how we're moving down the list. Additionally, once the schools are identified, we do some initial planning with the tribe or local school board on the design, the factors that they want, and matched up with our requirements. That process has made it much more transparent for how we address the schools. And by doing some of the earlier planning and design up front, it's helping us to move a little bit faster with the funding we have.
Thank you, Mr. Fragge. I want to make sure I address a question to our other witness with regards to the Indian Health Services. As we know, there's been a sad failure to uphold the trust responsibility, and we know that Native American communities' rates of substance abuse is higher than for other demographics. I've spent time in my district, and I hear over and over again about the importance of building facilities so that there are beds available. Recently, President Nez of the Navajo Nation reminded me about the promise of telehealth, particularly since many tribal communities are in rural areas. So I would like to ask you to address the importance of making sure we have broadband so we can bring quality behavioral health care to the IHS patient population. And then also, how are we going to, and what are the plans for increasing patient access to behavioral health care and to building the facilities or the portions of facilities to be able to address the issues regarding behavioral health and substance abuse and addiction?
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you for that question about behavioral health. One of the things during the pandemic that IHS and tribes were able to do was increase the use of telehealth, which was very helpful in getting care out to a number of patients across the system. That will continue after the pandemic as we continue to move ahead. Several things that you brought up really around behavioral health have to do with our aging facilities, with the lack of space. In many instances, we do not have the privacy that patients need and the providers need in order to carry out that critical interaction that takes place between the patient and the provider. One of the other things that it continues to be a challenge is our ability to recruit and retain those healthcare professionals with those specialties in behavioral health. We continue to see that need continue to increase across the system. One of the things that the new construction priority system will address once we've completed the grandfather list of the existing facilities will be to begin to look at behavioral health type facilities that will go on beyond the existing healthcare hospital and clinic operations that we have now. So we're hopeful that we'll be able to get to that in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Grinnell. I will now recognize our ranking member, Young, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this is a question for both the witnesses. In fiscal year 2021, the appropriations bill, Congress provided indefinite appropriations for 105L tribal leasing program. Now, can you both describe each agency is implementing this authority, and how are you working with tribes that currently carry out BIA and IHS functions in tribally owned facilities that could benefit from the 105 program? Hello.
I can.
Either one.
Okay, I'll start and then hand it over to Mr. Grinnell. We're a little bit newer to the 105L program than IHS at Indian Affairs. We're currently working with tribes actively as they come in with their requests. We've had 105L lease requests across a wide variety of areas: administrative buildings, law enforcement, schools. And so we're doing our best to meet that need. As you can see, the budget requests $36.6 million, which is a $15 million increase over the previous year. The program is essentially doubled almost every year due to the popularity of the 105L leases with tribes. So what we've tried to do is be able to make our internal process clear to tribes to facilitate their understanding of what's necessary. We've put guidance on our website regarding our internal process for doing it. Similarly, the 2021 appropriations bill included guidance for Indian Affairs and IHS to conduct consultations on 105L implementation. So we've been working across our agencies to plan that, and that's something that we'll be rolling out later this summer.
Okay.
Yes, and Ranking Member Young, thank you for the question. In addition to what was mentioned by BIA, IHS is working directly with the tribes on any of the negotiations for any of the programs that have came in and requested that to be included in their agreements and their compacts and their contracts. One of the things I would like to mention is that a lot of the expertise around IHS came out of the Alaska area, just in their ability to work with the tribes of the Alaska area. And those individuals have been first and foremost in helping us to get this process underway. We've requested in our 22 budget the amount that we feel like is based on what's been provided by the tribes. And we feel like that we'll be able to meet all the needs that are coming in for that. And we will continue to work with our federal partners to make this process more meaningful and hopefully a lot easier for everybody coming in the future. Thank you.
Ken, just one thing, Madam Chair. Is there anything we should be doing to make the program work better? Either one of you.
Good question for the chair. I think we do need to look at the program. I think the various programs that allow tribes to either enter into joint venture, lease, and actually exercise their self-determination rights is very important. We have many tribes who do it so successfully, so we will continue to explore that, Mr. Ranking Member Young.
All right. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Ranking Member, for your question, inquiry, and concern with regards to this unique and very, I think, effective method. I did my first joint venture maybe a decade ago. It was under a different rule, but similar in nature. The chair will now recognize the Representative Gallego from the state of Arizona.
Can you change that? Because they're going to say me now.
Is it?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My first question is for Mr. Grinnell. Mr. Grinnell, I was glad to see that IHS budget this year includes a proposal to allow urban Indian organizations to use their funds on renovation and construction projects like other contractors. This proposal is identical to my bill, the Urban Indian Health Provider Facilities Improvement Act. I also want to thank IHS for the technical assistance you provide on the legislation. But I am hoping that you can expand on IHS's proposal and explain why removing this restriction is necessary to allow UIOs to better serve their patients.
Yes, thank you for that question regarding the urban Indian organizations. In the past, up until now, those UIOs were not able to utilize funds from IHS related to any facility issues unless it had to do with accreditation through one of the accrediting bodies. Fortunately, there is proposed language in the 22 CJ that we feel like will help to address that issue going forward. And with our Urban Confer in place, we continue to get good input from those facilities on their needs, and we hope that going forward we'll be able to address those things in the future.
Right, and given IHS inclusion of this fix in this budget request, would IHS feel positive about passing legislation to enact the proposal also?
Well, I'm not exactly sure why it was included that way in the law, but we can only speculate that the drafters of that law did not have an understanding about the UIOs and their need. And I would only refer to you and the subcommittee to our CJ on that issue for the 22 president's budget. So we're hoping that that's going to help to address it in the future.
And I guess, I mean, is there, in your opinion, any good reason for it still to exist as a restriction on UIOs today, when most no longer use the accreditation standard mentioned in that specific statute?
Yes, sir. I'm not really sure why it had been included in the law.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Grinnell. Now yield back.
Thank you, Representative Gallego. The chair will now recognize Representative Rosendale for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My first question is for Mr. Grinnell. Mr. Grinnell, in Montana and across the nation, Indian country was hit particularly hard by COVID-19. What are some of the causes that you would attribute that to?
Thank you for the question, sir. My opinion, a number of the reasons why that Indian country saw COVID to be such a major pandemic really had to do with a number of things that relate to particular tribes. One thing in particular is that many of the homes that Indian families reside in are multi-generational, where there may be young, middle-aged, as well as elders that all reside within one household. That makes things extremely difficult when you get into exposure and contact tracing and spread of the pandemic. The other thing that we really saw that was a major issue across Indian country was the lack of sanitation facilities was a major cause for the spread of the pandemic. And I can give examples like on the Navajo where we had many locations where there was not potable water. That created just the ability to have fresh water. The basic sanitation things that were recommended, like hand washing and so forth, were just not available to many of those remote locations. And so we continue to see the spread of that virus throughout Indian country, a lot of times because of those particular factors.
Okay, thank you. And what infrastructure do you believe should be prioritized to ensure that our reservations are prepared for future viral outbreaks?
Well, thank you for that question, sir. As the pandemic went on, and both IHS and tribal health programs and the tribes themselves, lots of things were learned about how to handle the pandemic going forward. A lot of good things took place within those reservations and within those healthcare facilities that I think prepared us and positioned us going forward. We did some things that we're going to put into place, such as making sure that we've got access to good PPE, vaccines, anything else that's available to treat patients that come into contact with the virus. And we'll make sure that those things are in place going forward. The other thing that I think that really worked is we had really good communication across the system. And I think that that was tremendously beneficial. We saw time and time again where that communication between the tribes and the IHS and the providers and so forth really had a positive impact on being able to get that word out to address the vaccine and also to get the vaccination program underway.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. My next question is for, and I hope I pronounce this properly, Mr. Fragge.
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 Yes,
Got it. I think COVID-19 showed us just how critical, reliable, high-speed internet access is. Unfortunately, many rural tribal communities still lack the needed broadband infrastructure. Can you discuss further efforts the Bureau is currently taking to deploy broadband to ensure access for rural schools, medical facilities, and tribal members' homes?
Yes, happy to. Thank you, Representative Rosendale. We're taking this broadband on a couple different fronts. Regarding schools, for the ones that we have more direct control over, we've been focused on bringing all of our schools up to 100 megs, kind of at least the minimum broadband speed. And I can say we're down to the final 2 schools, which we're hoping to complete within the next 6 months. So that's at the facility we can control. Similarly, using some of the COVID supplemental funds, we've also are deploying funds to increase broadband speeds at our more remote PIA facilities, which also have some challenges. More broadly across Indian country, some of the bigger pots of money are at other agencies, like the Department of Commerce has a $1 billion tribal broadband grant program. So we've been playing a role there of working with other agencies to provide technical assistance and helping them work with tribes, for example, how to deploy grants like that. We also issued a national tribal broadband strategy, which talks about creating leadership forums for broadband. So in that area, it's more of a technical assistance focus. And our 22 budget does include some additional resources for us to build out our technical assistance staff to kind of glue together the pieces between the permitting process, which we also play a role in, whether it's rights of way and other factors, or for helping understand financing opportunities.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Fragge. And Madam Chair, I do see I'm out of time, so I would yield back.
Thank you. Thank you for your questions. The chair will now recognize the gentleman from Florida, Representative Soto.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for hosting this really important meeting. Across the nation, we are working on the American Jobs Plan to build back better, and we need to make sure that Indian country is included. In this 21st century national infrastructure upgrade, we can't leave our brothers and sisters and Native American tribes behind. The U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs has its own agency branch, the Seminole Agency, in my home state of Florida. It's the first point of contact for the Seminole Nation of Florida and the Miccosukee tribe. It includes branches in forestry to protect tribal and individual Indians' natural, cultural, and heritage resources, helps to manage resources to promote responsible use and sustain a dynamic economy, economic and cultural opportunities, safeguarding property and financial assets, advancing scientific knowledge, and improving the quality of life in the Indian communities in Florida. And we know that our Seminole tribe and Miccosukee tribes have prospered in some areas and have major challenges in other areas. Urban Indian gaming has been a national model coming out of the Seminole tribe. Yet the tribes, including Miccosukee, also have an extensive agricultural tradition, farming and ranching, citrus and cattle, fruits and vegetables. And there are many challenges they face, from access to enough water, to rural broadband, to healthcare and education services, even respecting tribal sovereignty on their lands. These challenges are exacerbated during the COVID-19 pandemic, particularly the healthcare services. It's key that we fulfill our promise to Indian country and fully fund the Bureau of Indian Affairs Education and Health Services and help them build back better by upgrading BIA facilities in Florida and across the country under the American Jobs Plan. Mr. Grinnell, according to your testimony, the older IHS facility gets the more costly it is to operate and maintain. However, it is also very expensive to completely replace an IHS facility. In your opinion, would it be more efficient to replace each of IHS's aging or deficient facilities completely?
Yes, sir. Thank you for that question. Yes, in my opinion, replacement is really the best alternative instead of trying to continue to deal with an old and dilapidated facility. As I mentioned earlier, many of our facilities are over 37 years old. The two I mentioned, both Gallup and Phoenix, are both over 50 years old. With that age of a facility, it's just almost impossible to keep up with new technology and retrofitting in order to deliver health care. By replacement, we have shown that the number of outpatient visits increases by nearly 50% because of access to care has greatly improved. They've got better technology, and also the new construction methodologies that are used and take into account things that we can't do in the old facilities, such as Wi-Fi and so forth, because of the poor state of condition of the old facilities.
Thank you. And do you have an estimate for the cost of completely replacing all of IHS's aging or deficient facilities?
Yes, sir. Thank you for that question. It's estimated that it would take over $14 billion to replace the existing facilities that we're aware of right now. And that includes both the Gallup facility that I mentioned, the Phoenix Indian Medical Center, as well as replacement of the Alaska Native Medical Center, which is the three largest medical facilities that we have.
Thank you so much. And Mr. Fragge, are you able to provide us with a current estimate of the Department of Interior's deferred maintenance backlog? And if so, what fraction of the backlog is attributed to BIA owned and operated facilities?
Yes, Representative Soto. The entire department's deferred maintenance backlog is roughly $22 billion. And Indian Affairs' share of that is around $1.7 billion, or 8%. And one thing, again, important to note, that's just kind of the base that's taking care of it. Again, it doesn't always mean it's the most modern detention center, or it's the most modern or culturally appropriate school. But that gives you a picture, at least, of where we sit.
Thank you so much, and I yield back.
Thank you so much, Representative Soto. The chair would now recognize the gentleman from California, Representative Openoloty, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My first question is for Mr. Grinnell. I think we share the goal of having this extra funding reduce the backlog in construction of healthcare facilities for tribes and indigenous peoples. So can you tell us that once the facility construction priority list is complete, what methodology will IHS use to determine which of the projects on that list get constructed with this new funding?
Yes, thank you, sir, for that question. Currently, we've got 12 facilities left on the existing construction list. Once those have been completed, the new methodology and the new factors that will determine which facilities will basically be identified first has already been developed through much tribal consultation and work through the FAB, which is composed of 12 tribal representatives as well as 2 federal officials. Once we get closer to completing the construction of the existing list, then we'll start identifying those facilities that will be ranked out by priority to begin construction of those under the new methodology.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
That seems to make sense. We would certainly encourage you to continue consulting with the tribes as you refine that list, because certainly no one knows better than they do which facilities are the most important.
Yes, sir.
And a question for Mr. Fragge. I think we share the goal of ensuring that this infrastructure funding goes towards improving economic activity and viability for the tribes and not into increased bureaucracy. What is the BIA going to do to ensure that that occurs?
In our view, a couple of different ways. One is where, again, we're trying to make our processes transparent. So as I described before, we're making clear how we're prioritizing projects so that everybody knows what's coming next. And we post our lists up on the website. We've done that for our education construction program. We started consultation with tribes for our public safety and justice construction side to do the same, set up a new process for them that's similar to education. That's a very transparent, data-driven process. So we don't spend too much time on process and we spend more time moving forward. So that's one key for the project we control. The other piece, obviously, in any infrastructure development, there's the ensuring that we're moving the role that we have in approving rights of way or other leases to ensure that the tribes, that as projects move forward and it's pushed on the tribal end, they're able to do what they need to be able to move projects forward quickly.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think transparency is a great place to start. Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Representative Obernolte. The chair will now recognize the gentleman from Hawaii, Representative Case, for 5 minutes. Still on?
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Grinnell. Couple of questions, and the context for my questions does arise out of my own Indigenous peoples, the Native Hawaiians, the Indigenous peoples of our country whose origins lie in Hawaii. Of course, they are not directly subject to the Indian Health Service, do not have direct federal facility, IHS federal facilities, although they are very, very much analogous, of course, in that respect through the Native Hawaiian Healthcare Act and other acts, and in fact, I believe should be much more closely aligned with and benefit from the same programs that, for example, benefit urban Indian organizations. They do actually contract to deliver IHS services to Native Americans and Alaska Natives in Hawaii, and so there's a very close tie. So the question starts with Native Hawaiians, but does apply to other Indigenous peoples. We've been talking about facilities, and there's no question that facilities need major attention. You made very brief mention of personnel that staff those facilities. So, for example, healthcare professionals, and the challenge is to staff to the necessary levels, both professionally and numbers, that will deliver the services that we want to deliver. I know this is true, again, in Hawaii, the Native Hawaiian peoples in Hawaii, where it's very hard to retain, medical professionals in the NHOs, and that seems to be the case as well in the Indian Health Service, where you have attrition, where you have turnover, where oftentimes Indigenous peoples do not return to provide those services. What's the solution there? I mean, we have, of course, mechanisms, federal mechanisms, such as the Public Health Service that incentivize doctors, for example, to have their education, in fact, financed in part by service to IHS, and that does some of that. It's a great program, but it's not in and of itself solving the basic problem. So, facilities have to have people in them, and what's the solution there? Do you have anything that we should be thinking about that would offer good models that we should pursue both for those covered under IHS as well as to my Native Hawaiian community?
Yes, thank you, sir. That's a really good question, and it is one that we continue to be challenged by each and every day. Our loan repayment and scholarship programs have been very effective for future employees across the system, and we appreciate the support for that. And we actually asked for additional funding on that. There's some other things that really challenge us, and a lot of it has to do with the remote locations that our facilities are at. Those providers and their families and their spouses not having opportunity for employment, even schools, even the ability to have things within close proximity continue to challenge us. Some of the things that we also have to deal with is the competition is great for those providers, and we don't have the same authorities that the VA has for their providers. And those are some of the things that we have some of them, but we don't have all of them. I think that the ability to get some of those additional authorities for IHS would be tremendously beneficial for us in being able to be competitive so that we can recruit and retain those professionals.
Well, I'm sorry, what authorities are you referring to specifically?
The VA, the Veterans Administration's Title 38 authority allows us to pay more to our physicians and some of our other specialties, dentists and physicians and so forth. And they have more expanded authorities than we have available to us. And if those are offered to IHS, that would really help us to be more competitive.
So you're competing on the basis of just straight market rates? There's no additional incentive that would keep folks that were in the IH system as a matter of loan repayment or otherwise for that matter in IHS? So it's number one. And then number two, I thought what you were going to say was that there was also some program that incentivized the second part of your question, which was job availability for family members, spouses.
Yes, yes, sir. And we see that as one of those things that works against us. When a lot of times the professional family moves into one of those locations, one of the questions is, my spouse also is looking for a job opportunity, and in many cases, those just aren't available. And so that does work against us as well.
Okay. I see my time has expired, so I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Representative Case, for that line of inquiry. The chair will now recognize the gentleman from Arizona, Chairman Grijalva, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Couple of real quick questions. Mr. Secretary, the president's budget includes a proposal for tribal water settlement funding. Can you tell us why it's important and how much is in this proposal?
Great, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, so this is an important proposal because the budgeting is proposing to reclassify water settlement funding from discretionary to mandatory funding. And over 10 years, it provides over $2 billion for currently enacted settlements. And that includes the recently enacted Navajo-Utah water settlement and the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribe settlement, which are both, especially the CSKT settlement, which is fairly large. So it's important because it provides some certainty to the tribes that the funding will be there. It helps with planning for these large, in some cases, real infrastructure projects.
I appreciate that. I think that has been a nagging issue in terms of the water settlements, and particularly in the Southwest as we go through this prolonged and seemingly endless drought. The role of those settlements, the role of protecting those settlements for tribes in the Southwest is going to be critical. So we appreciate that there is that movement away in that direction. 20 million is to increase PIE's IT capacity and to upgrade broadband, particularly in the schools. And is that enough resources? What resources are needed? And could you benefit from an independent IT office separate from the one that's in the BIA?
Yeah, so the $20 million increase is really important for us. Since the pandemic has started, we've been able to use significant COVID-19 supplemental funding, the CARES Act, the 21 Omnibus Emergency Funds, and the Rescue Plan to really modernize and take a huge step forward for BIE schools to develop a learning management system, advanced broadband. So we're building that with that capability. The 20 million will allow us to continue those needs and build that into our budget long term. We'll let you know if we need more in future years when we have a better sense soon.
Well, on that topic, on that point, the president's budget for FY22, American Jobs Plan, in my estimation, and I'm not asking for a response, Mr. Secretary, I think the overall projected funding is inadequate in addressing the needs of this topic, that the topics of this hearing are undertaking. And I hope that those concerns are addressed as we go forward, both with the budget and with the jobs plan, because and that, I think critical, very important initiatives that will come from Congress and this committee regarding those budgets. I hope that there is serious consideration on the part of the administration to look at that, consider them. I think there's an urgency, and in response to one question that was offered up, why the pandemic was so agreed in Indian country, and the reasons that were given, I accept those. But I think there's an overlaying issue. One, the historic disparities. We're talking about one area right now around healthcare, the inadequate and response, and the response by Congress to finally to earmark and put aside $20 billion to go specifically to Indian country to respond to the pandemic. I think those were factors as well. But I think we're dealing with a history here and not just what happened yesterday, because what the response by Indian Health Services and others to the pandemic was stellar. I don't have a complaint. But I think we got into that catch-up situation because what has happened in the long course over decades upon decades upon decades. So that's no question, me just making a comment. And I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Chairman Grijalva. I'd also thank our first panel for answering our questions, for submitting your testimony. I will note that the members may have additional questions for the witnesses, and we'll ask you to respond to those in writing. We will get those to you. I now want to turn to the second panel of witnesses for their testimony. Second panel, as with the previous panel, oral statements are limited to 5 minutes, but your entire statement that you previously provided will be part of the hearing record. As you notice, the on-screen timer will begin counting. It will turn orange when you have 1 minute remaining. You can lock the timer so you can see where it's at. I will ask you to please wrap up your statement when we exceed 5 minutes. After your testimony is complete, please remember to mute to avoid inadvertent background noise. I will allow the entire panel to testify before we question the witnesses. And I'd also like to remind our second panel that as non-administration witnesses, you're encouraged to participate in the Witness Diversity Survey created by the Congressional Office of Diversity and Inclusion. I think today's hearing, we wanted to make sure we heard from the administration directly on their budgets and on their plans and directly on their backlogs. But as many of the Congress members have noted today, it's also very, very important to hear from the tribes because they are living with this directly. Their members are affected directly, and that's what we'll be doing in the second panel. I will now recognize the Honorable David Hill, who is the Principal Chief of the Muskogee Nation. Honorable David Hill.
Ms. Chair, David Hill, Geo Jessica Chairwoman and members of the subcommittee. My name is David Hill, and I am proud to serve as Principal Chief of the Muskogee Creek Nation and to address you today from the heart of the Muskogee Reservation. Thank you for the invitation to discuss the most urgent priorities that impact us today. As you know, nearly a year ago, the Supreme Court delivered one of the most celebrated decisions in Indian country history. Today, we are present with the opportunity like we never have seen before. The opportunity to transform the affirmation of our reservation into true prosperity for the future. We have an opportunity through capacity building to meet immediate needs and to deliver the system that secured public safety as well as economic development for the generation of all who live within our borders. In their ruling, the Supreme Court affirmed tribal sovereignty, which is good for the tribe and good for the communities around our reservation. This empowered our nation to work together with states, provide more relief to overwhelmed states' justice system, and realize more economic growth and prosperity for our region. The reality is that tribal capacity at the time of the Supreme Court's decision had been severely limited by the state's illegal assumption of jurisdiction. Let me now briefly discuss two immediate needs that are more fully expanded upon in my written testimony: incarceration and court facilities. Our first immediate need, incarceration. After McGirt, we now hold criminal and civil jurisdiction responsibilities to cover more than 3 million acres, a landmass greater than New Jersey. Our court had to expand services to tribal citizens, not only in our nation, but more than 100,000 American Indians and Alaska Natives living within our reservation. One of the most urgent and pressing needs on the Muskogee Reservation is providing proper incarceration facilities, not only for our nation, but for other tribal government in the region and federal officials whose responsibilities have grown overnight. Currently, there are no federal detention centers for juveniles and only 3 federal facilities for adult incarceration. Without additional federal investment, the strain on public safety will undoubtedly increase. As a result of the growing population within the reservation, the nation presently invests millions annually in reintegration, victim services, and behavioral health services to tribal citizens, but in a post-McGirt world, this number will expand considerably. Second immediate need, court facilities. Today, the Muskogee Nation has just one courtroom, centrally located within the 4,867 square miles. Prior to the Supreme Court's decision, the 2019 case filings were approximately 700 cases. By the end of 2020, our courts had more than 1,600 case pendings. And we are expecting to double that in 2021. Based on these figures, we estimate at least 4 additional courtrooms are necessary. In conclusion, repairing the damage done to tribal capacity by decades of a broken system will not be solved in one budget cycle or one infrastructure bill. We can and must address short-term pressing needs, which are not necessary but are essential. We are making substantial investment, but we need the federal government to live up to its part of the bargain and fulfill its trust responsibilities by adjusting and building permanent capacities that reflecting the new law of the land, the opportunity it provides, and the needs that comes with it. We acknowledge there have been challenges post-McGirt. However, let me be clear, we are fully capable, willing, and actively responding to these additional responsibilities. This moment of self-governance is what sovereignty is about. This is what we're fighting for. Thank you for your time and consideration. Mado.
Thank you so much for sharing with us your perspectives. The chair would now like to recognize the Honorable Ned Norris, Jr., who is the chairman of the Tohono Tribe. Chairman Norris, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Ledger Fernandez, Ranking Member Young, and honorable members of the subcommittee. I am Ned Norris, Jr., the chairman of the Tohono Nation. Thank you for this opportunity to testify. Our reservation in southern Arizona is one of the largest in the United States. We rely on certain federal facilities to provide services to our tribal citizens, including schools and health facilities. Like other tribes, our federal facilities are in very poor condition, and funding to replace or rebuild them is perpetually inadequate. First, we desperately need serious federal investment in Indian education facilities. In 2016, an Interior Inspector General report on Indian schools found major wide-ranging facility deficiencies and health and safety concerns. In 2020, the Bureau of Indian Education, or BIE, identified 86 BIE schools that are in poor condition. Fewer than half of these are in an active facility improvement program, and implementation of those programs is slow and underfunded. The nation's Santa Rosa Ranch School is one of our schools on the BIE facility improvement list. Built in 1960, it currently serves about 73 students in grades K through 8. In 2015, the nation conducted an inspection of the school and revealed a host of serious safety issues. In December 2018, after the nation raised further alarms, BIE identified what is labeled, quote, high priority deficiencies, end quote, and closed the school. In March 2019, BIE reopened the school with 5 temporary modular units. The school is still using those modular buildings. In 2020, BIE conducted a site assessment and developed a plan to renovate the school and replace some of the facilities at the Santa Rosa Ranch School. As of now, BIE reports that planning for the project is complete and that expects to begin soliciting and awarding contracts later this year, with an estimated completion date of June 2023. While the nation appreciates that there has been progress in planning for the Santa Rosa Ranch School, the fact that our children attended school for years in an unsafe, unhealthy facility is not acceptable, nor is the fact that so little progress has been made to permanently address those conditions. Second, I want to address Indian healthcare facilities. The COVID-19 pandemic has laid bare the inadequacies of federal funded healthcare facilities in Indian country, which unnecessarily cost lives. This is why investment in Indian health services facilities, which provide healthcare to millions of Native Americans, is absolutely necessary. The National Tribal Budget Formulation Work Group noted in its FY21 recommendations that, quote, at current rates of funding, if a new IHS facility were built today, it would not be replaced for 200 to 250 years, end quote. Our IHS hospital is 50 years old and serves our 34,000 members with only 14 beds, providing only the most basic services. A replacement hospital has been on the IHS facilities construction list for over 20 years. Despite the nation's pleas to date, IHS has allocated only about $15 million in funding, while $225 million is needed. IHS estimates that construction funding will be available in FY22 and 23, but even if that estimate is correct, our members will not have access to a new facility that provides better, more comprehensive healthcare until 2024 at the earliest. The nation's members have waited for more than 25 years for a decent, accessible healthcare facility, and they are still waiting. The nation's children have been put at risk and at unfair disadvantage by attending unsafe schools. Our situation illustrates the dismal condition of federally funded facilities in Indian country and the critical importance of investing in these facilities in the American Jobs Plan. Thank you for your time today, and I am happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Chair Norris. The chair would now like to recognize the Honorable Timothy Nuvong-Yoma from the Hopi Tribe. He is the chairman of the Hopi Tribe. Chairman, 5 minutes.
Ansai Kwakwa Lolma. Good afternoon, Chairwoman Ledger Fernandez, Ranking Member Young, and honorable members of the subcommittee. My name is Timothy Nuvong-Yoma, and I have the honor of serving as chairman of the Hopi Tribe. Thank you for the opportunity to testify about our struggle to replace our detention center. Our saga begins almost 30 years ago when the BIA straddled us with a reconfigured and inadequate detention facility, which quickly fell into disrepair and was eventually condemned in 2016. We fought for funding to replace the facility, which was secured in 2017. However, since that time, there's been no broken ground, only broken promises. I personally have testified before Congress 4 times on this issue, but as of yet, no one has held the BIA accountable, and we still do not have a detention facility. The Hopi Detention Center, or HDC, was originally built in 1981 as a treatment center, but the BIA eventually converted and repurposed it into a jail. This has led to a host of issues because the facility was not originally designed to hold prisoners. In 2004, the Interior Department's Office of Inspector General conducted a health and safety inspection of the HDC, which resulted in the immediate closure of the Juvenile Corrections Section. The Hopi Tribe took it upon itself to begin to design and planning for a new facility. We invested $1 million into the effort, but there were no federal funds available to construct the project. So, despite the serious issues with HDC, it had to remain in operation. Inspections between 2013 to 2015 led to further portions of the HDC being closed for safety concerns. Many inmates were transported and housed at facilities across Arizona and Colorado. In October 2016, the BIA formally condemned and closed the HDC without consulting the tribe. In response, the tribe declared a state of emergency. The closure placed a great strain on law enforcement's ability to respond to public safety issues and left reservation residents vulnerable. Law enforcement had to transport prisoners to jails 80 miles away, which took officers off the reservation for several hours. The tribe requested assistance from BIA headquarters in Congress. Hopi leaders traveled to Washington, D.C. twice in March 2017 to meet with our congressional delegation, the executive branch, and to testify before this subcommittee regarding the critical need to replace the HDC. But things continued to get worse. The BIA informed the tribe that it was running out of funding to continue contracting for bed space. It sent a memo to the tribe's court with commutation instructions for sentences. The BIA instructed officers to conduct cite and release measures, which emboldened criminals who knew that there was no fear of prison. This had to stop. In June 2017, the tribe had a call with the Interior Deputy Secretary. The call resulted in several actions, including a commitment to pursue a $5 million reprogramming request to build a replacement facility. In August 2017, the Interior Appropriations Subcommittees approved the request. At that time, DFMC reached out to the tribe to consult on the project. It's been 4 years since the reprogramming was approved and no shovel has hit the ground. The tribe and our congressional delegation have applied constant pressure on Interior, but the inquiries were not responded to. Timelines were broken, plans were changed, consultations failed to take place, and it was never made clear to us who was in charge. At times, I wondered if the money for the project was even there. The most recent update from DFMC is that the deadline for contractors to bid on the project slipped again. It's now July 2021. By the time the contract is awarded and the design phase completed, we are looking at February 2022 before a shovel possibly enters the ground. The most encouraging news from the latest update was the confirmation of additional funding for the project. Setting aside the detention center for a moment, I also want to take this opportunity to raise the significant health and safety issues at several Hopi schools. The Hopi Day School is over 100 years old, with most of the building made from logs. Another Hopi school is over 80 years old, and 2 others are over 50 years old. All these schools need major repairs or replacement. Our students deserve access to quality educational environments. In closing, until the permanent detention center is completed, public safety concerns on the Hopi Reservation will remain. We need continued congressional oversight, and we need accountability from the Interior Department. And we call on Congress to increase funding for school construction because our students deserve better learning environments. I would be happy to answer any questions. Thank you, Chairwoman.
Thank you so much, Chairman. The chair would now recognize the Honorable Victoria Kichayan, who is Chairwoman of the Winnebago Tribe of Nebraska. Madam Chairwoman, for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Lehar Fernandez, Chairman Grijalva, Ranking Member Young, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to testify. It's an honor to be here on behalf of the Winnebago people. Today, Native people are weathering the perfect storm. We're 1 year into the pandemic against a backdrop of social, economic, and health disparities amongst racial turmoil and political unrest. Thanks to Congress, help has been on the way. Historic amounts of resources are coming to Alaska Native, Hawaiian, and American Indians on a path to recovery. Thanks to President Joe Biden's executive orders, the federal government must begin to face its deep-rooted, systematic racist policies in order to strive towards a more perfect union of racial and economic equality. As we've learned to fight COVID-19 and we are getting vaccinations into arms, there's one thing that we've always known, and that's the inherent sovereignty of the Winnebago Tribe and the tribe's ability to respond to their tribal members. We know the best way to serve our members, and we can quickly respond, make decisions, and call upon the powers of self-governance to serve the specific needs of our community. The Winnebago people make our home on the banks of the Missouri River in northeastern Nebraska and northwestern Iowa. We have over 5,000 tribal members, tribal enterprises that employ hundreds and thousands of employees in Nebraska, Iowa, and around the world. Through treaties, the supreme law of the land, the United States had promised the Winnebagos a physician and medical care, and we never forgot that. In fact, the leadership fought for a new hospital when the Indian Health Service wanted to turn our existing hospital into a clinic. The IHS operation and the hospital became life-threatening, and the Winnebago people suffered loss of life. The Centers for Medicaid and Medicaid Services terminated the hospital's CMS certification. The tribe then fought to assume management of the broken hospital. Today, 12 Clans Unity Hospital serves 10,000 patients of tribal citizens for our tribe and surrounding tribes. 12 Clans is in the process of pursuing the CMS certification, and it's within reach. We've now begun to turn our sights on the best way to keep our people safe and secure. The Winnebago Tribe, Santee Sioux Nation, and Omaha Nation are served by the Bureau of Indian Affairs Winnebago Agency. The Winnebago Police Department has 2 officers funded by the BIA and 2 officers funded by the Winnebago Tribe, which falls under the Great Plains Justice Services. The department estimates that it's understaffed 85% of the time, with only 1 officer available for community response. The Chief of Police and Lieutenant are BIA funded and cover weekday shifts, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Monday through Friday. 2 tribally funded officers cover evening and night shifts. On weekends, there's only 1 officer on duty and 1 officer on call for all shifts. The Winnebago Reservation lacks a jail, and BIA law enforcement has a contract with Thurston County, which is a 40-mile round trip. The county retains right to refuse prisoners and has limited capacity. For that reason, the next year is holding facilities in Wagner, South Dakota, and that's 272 miles round trip, and further Laurel Brule, which is 538 miles round trip. So transporting takes 5 to 12 hours, leaving 1 officer for patrol and 1 for response on the reservation. This doesn't even take into account if an officer has to go to the ER and get a medical release for a prisoner, and that takes boots off the ground as well. In order to more adequately provide for the peace and safety of our people, the tribe is considering establishing its own public safety system. We have violent crime, we have a meth epidemic, and we have many public safety concerns. We need reliable law enforcement and a local facility. We will undergo our own internal process and determine which path is best for the tribe. But as we emerge from this perfect storm, sovereign tribal nations that predate the United States must overcome the pandemic and health disparities, health inequities, and decades of long underfunding. Through our inherent powers of self-governance, we must make bold decisions and provide for the well-being of our people. This sacred responsibility is why we take these government decisions so seriously, and our survival literally depends on it. The thought that I want to leave the committee with is that self-governance should be a choice, and often tribes like Winnebago contemplate self-governance as a means for an alternative response to mismanaged or underfunded programs. And a tribe should, with the capabilities and the leadership support, should pursue these pathways for the betterment of the community, not for their survival. Thank you for listening to the Winnebago people.
Thank you, Chairwoman, for bringing the voice of the Winnebago people to our subcommittee. The chair would now like to recognize the Honorable Chief Allen, who is chairman of the Coeur d'Alene Tribe. Thank you very much for joining us, Chief Allen, and you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and Ranking Member Representative Young and the members of the committee. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to provide testimony to you guys this afternoon. It's an honor to serve the Coeur d'Alene Tribal Council. I've been on Tribal Council for 18 years. I've been the chairman for 14 years. And in that 18 years of service, one of the things I'm most proud of is I listen to all my tribal leaders and my elders and listening to all the horror stories that you guys have all heard and about all the infrastructure and all the dilapidated buildings and hospitals. My tribe and my elders were very blessed. 30 years ago, we had no healthcare. We had a one shack building, and when we got gaming here, we decided, the one thing that our people need, and yes, it's jobs and security and stuff, but it was healthcare. And so our elders at that time took the time to put the money aside and to get funding for our community health center, and we built one of the a model for the United States to serve our people. And we would have waited, if our elders would have waited at that time to get on the list and the priority list, we'd still be waiting, and we couldn't wait. And it saddens me to listen to some of our other tribal leaders that still have to do that. And so I echo all my colleagues have said. We need to put money into infrastructure for our people and for our people to use that. For 50 years, you've been hearing this, self-determination. Tribes need to, tribe knows. Yes, we do know. We know what's right for our people. So we're asking for the community to set aside that infrastructure dollars for tribes to use money to know that we know best to serve our people. Not somebody in Washington, not somebody across the country. There's not one model that one shoe fits all, and each tribe is unique and different, and we need to. We're asking for that respect to you guys, for the committee to work with your colleagues to, when that infrastructure bill comes down, put that set aside money for infrastructure for tribes, and let us use it best that we know how to do it. And with that, you guys have heard all the stories, and all the stories are one thing in common. It's all similar. So with that, I will yield my time back to the committee. And again, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to testify on this, and I'm open for questions. Thank you so much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Chief Allen. I do thank the entire panel of witnesses for this testimony. I'm going to also remind the members as we open up for questions that there is a 5-minute limit on questions. And I'm going to start by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. I am struck by both Chief Allen's commentary, in fact, all of our witnesses, with regards to how they have, when tribes have been able to compact or contract for the facilities and provide their facilities, they talk about how they have new and renewed facility. It's a modern facility. We're representing and recognizing the needs in our community. We start hearing about the issues of culturally appropriate, and I think that is all very important. Chairwoman Kichian, I would like to ask you, with regards to the facility that you took over and are now operating, you describe it as the 12 Clans Unity Hospital is now a state-of-the-art hospital that serves 10,000 tribal citizens. When you provided that, where did you get the funds to actually construct or improve that facility?
The facility actually had been advocated to Congress for 15 years. And when the IHS was shifting facilities throughout the country to clinics, the fact that we're the only tribe that has language for a physician in our treaty, the tribal leadership never gave up on advocating for that new facility. And so the new facility was actually at first federally run, and under their management, they lost the CMS certification, which caused the tribe to assert self-governance and compact that facility.
And because I think that this is one of the keys is making sure. So you had a treaty language, but for many other tribes, they do have treaties, but if they're an executive order, or if they're a grant, depending on how they came into being, there was still the trust responsibility that covers all tribes with this need. But what I understand you're telling as a story is the facility was you had it built, right? You had a facility that, as you say, is state of the art. And I think that that's a key issue of making sure that we have the facilities built so that then they can be competitive and contracted, because then you get to the importance of making them culturally self-relevant. So I wanted to ask the Chairman Norris, you have talked about the importance of the schools and the need for the BIE schools. Can you give us another idea of what you believe the cost would be to have the kind of school that you would like, and then whether you'd be interested in running it yourself, or whether you believe that you would like to continue to have the BIE versus having it be a tribally controlled school?
Thank you. Thank you for that question. As far as the cost for funding the replacement or building the new schools, I don't have that readily accessible with me. However, the nation, my tribal nation, has been giving some consideration over the course of a number of years over the idea of contracting, 638 contracting for the Bureau of Indian Education schools. And obviously, at least from my perspective, I think that what we want to make sure that we do is that we ourselves are prepared adequately to assume that level of responsibility. And so in answer to your question, I believe that yes, my tribal nation would give every consideration to contracting for the BIE schools, but we would do that in a way that ensures our ability to make sure that we are successful in that 638 contract. You know, I've always said that you don't want to contract for something and then end up failing and then giving it back. You know, if we're going to do this, we better be prepared to do it and do it right, even if it means a phased in process of contracting for those schools. So yes, I think that the interest is there. I think that the nation needs to make sure it has the resources in professional staff, the resources in funding, the resources in facilities, in order for us to be able to ensure our success on that.
Thank you very much, Chair. And Chair Youngby, I was going to ran out of time to be able to ask you a question. I want to thank you. I could hear the frustration in all of our testimony about the need to come so often to ask Congress to intervene to make sure that we fully fund the promises. I thank you for doing that again. And all I can assure you is that we will push to get the funding that is necessary. That is our job, and you are giving us the impetus to do it with your testimony today. The chair will now recognize the gentleman from California. He is now sitting as the ranking member, Obernolte.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you very much to our witnesses. My questions are for Chief Allen. I found your testimony very interesting. Your tribe has had a lot of success in owning and managing its own infrastructure, utilizing the authority given to you under the Indian Self-Determination Act. Can you give us some examples of obstacles to federal management of building and real property that your tribe has experienced?
I think some of the obstacles, like I said, we would still be waiting if we waited for the feds to do it. For example, one of the prime examples I want to use that we did being self-governance and getting, I think 60% of tribes are self-governance, get that money. That gives us the opportunity to go out and look for other sources of funding. For example, we just built a new youth center, part of our Marine Health Center, about $20 million, and we used some free market credits and a lot of our own monies, not ISS dollars, for that. And so, when you have to use federal dollars in contracting, you got to do all these hoops and things you got to jump through. And I want to remind the committee that tribes are very sophisticated, and we have been running businesses for 30 plus years, and we know how to do this. So when they talk about infrastructure dollars, yes, please send it to us, and please let us get out of the way, and we have good people on the ground that knows best for our communities, and so thank you so much for the question.
Sure. And Chief Allen, would something like the 105L program be beneficial to your tribe?
Yes, it would be very beneficial to our tribe. I think anytime that there's more things available for our tribe to tap into, that's always going to be helpful for us and our tribe.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you very much. The chair will now recognize Chairman Raul Grijalva for 5 minutes.
Thank you very, very much again, Madam Chair. A general question for Chief Hill, Chairman Norris, and Chair Nuvanyama. And it's a general question because part of the discussion and part of some of my colleagues' support for it's an investment strategy is through on the issue of sovereignty and etc. Is to push is to say that the tribes must own more of the investment in facilities and through a variety of means. But my question deals to the investment that the federal government, past tense and present, also has under the trust responsibility and in terms of promoting self-determination and sovereignty in Indian country. I agree that facilitating, expediting the process is critical in facilities improvements, and something has, and we need to work on that and do something about that definitively. But it is still about resources. It is still about those long waits for facility improvements. And as Chairman Norris, my friend, knows, the Santa Rosa issue is something that has that I personally know of and have agonized with for years, and just the process of not being able to get that urgency done when it should be done, it's been very frustrating. So let me ask you, to those three gentlemen, what do you see in terms of what the Biden budget and the jobs plan needs to reflect in terms of this issue? And second of all, the role of tribes in consultation and in expediting this investment, because I think it's not an either-or proposition. Tribes should be able to pursue outside investments, period. But there is a federal responsibility and investment that hasn't been made, and I think that's part of what we need to do in discussing this budget. Gentlemen, I can begin with Chief Hill, if you don't mind, and then the other two chairmen.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Pertaining to the budget, as you all know, that was based on what I call pre-McGirt, and that was based on 2019 budget. Post-McGirt, which we expanded, which is also in my testimony, where we have grown in law enforcement, tribal court, attorney general's office, children and family services. We have grown, and also being the fourth largest tribe, definitely where we need more funding. And also with the job plan, does mention several areas that need to address are very important to us here on the reservation. Nothing is mentioned of specific needs and advanced responsibilities of Post McGirt. But we consistently invest in rural communities and development. And that's where we see our greatest needs for job and commerce. We're actually in process of working and doing a joint.
Much time do you have? Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Nora, Chairman Norris, sir.
Thank
You don't
you,
mind?
Chairman. Just to add a different perspective on this from Chairman Hill's comments, which I agree with, but I'm just thinking that there needs to be some consideration to the geographical makeup of the location of the tribe, because there are some tribes are so remote and so isolated from many metropolitan jurisdictions that it makes it that much more difficult for tribes to be able to access the resources necessary to, let's say, even do renovations in a school or build another school. And so I think that getting the funding directly to the tribes and being able to listen to the tribe's ability and sometimes inability or some deficiencies that we might, or challenges, let me call them challenges that we may have to face in order to be able to accomplish the goals of being able to rebuild that particular school in a good way that's going to be able to provide services to our children.
Chairman, thank you. Mr. Chairman?
Yes, thank you, Chairman Grijalva. And I just want to echo what Chairman Norris just said. The geographical location is very important. Coupled with that, real quickly, it makes it equally challenging when we're trying to invest in our community. I don't know how many of you know that we are landlocked by another tribe, which makes that even more difficult than the original challenges most tribes face. But I'm encouraged about the actions that the Biden administration is taking to invest in our communities that we can also use to expand that investment. Chairman Grijalva, thank you.
I yield back, Madam Chair, and thank you so much, and thank you to our witnesses, and very much appreciated.
Thank you very much, Chair Grijalva. The chair would now like to recognize Representative Rodriguez. Thank you for joining, and you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Talofa lava. I want to thank you all for being here. Many of the issues that Indian tribes face are the same ones we face in the territories. I saw in one of the testimonies that you have a 50-year-old hospital that cannot meet current needs. This is the exact same issue we are facing with LBJ Tropical Medical Center in American Samoa. So my questions are for you, Ms. Kitchen. The tribe took big steps to assume management of the 12 Clans Unity Hospital. What advice do you have for tribes on how your tribe made that decision?
The tribe, to be quite honest, the tribe had lost all confidence in the Indian Health Service. And for 2 years, the tribe had been working and as partners with the federal agency. But at the same time, we had a parallel effort of learning about self-governance. And so as we continued to advocate and hold the agency accountable, we were let down time and time again. And so finally, out of a necessary step to not lose another life, the tribe engaged in self-governance. And so the advice I would give to others would be to do the community engagement and explain and educate the community on what self-governance is and why it's a benefit to the tribe. And that taking that on is we don't have anyone to blame but ourselves at that point. And having the leadership's support has gone a long way.
Thank you. And as tribes make these decisions for providing health care and keeping the peace in your communities, what can Congress do to keep the promises we made?
Congress can fully fund the agency's need, and the tribal leadership are engaged in a budget formulation process. And so they've crunched the numbers on what the need is, and we just have to come to you with the kind ask and with our advocacy and our talking points on why we shouldn't be susceptible to scoring sheets and putting dollars to lives, and with the first Americans being on the shortest end of that stick time and time.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Representative Rodriguez. And the chair would now like to recognize the gentleman from Arizona, Representative Gallego.
Thank you, Chairwoman, and good to see my my friends back here, and good to see you, Chairman Norris specifically. Chairman, thank you so much for testifying here today in your testimony to discuss the unsafe conditions that the nation's students were forced to deal with while attending Santa Rosa Ranch School. The school is one of the many on BIE's improvement list. Can you expand on how the backlog of BIE facilities needs, pardon me, I apologize, facility needs impact the nation's ability to replace this building in a timely manner? And how long has the nation been waiting in total for this?
Well, thank you, Congressman Gallego. It's good to see you as well. Well, the nation has been, like I said, been utilizing this particular Santa Rosa Ranch School for many years. It's antiquated, and it has not been providing the level of quality facilities that is necessary. At least for this particular school, you know, the issues with regards to the safety and the structural concerns, you know, came up in a 2015 inspection of the Santa Rosa Ranch School. And we requested this because of the unsafe conditions at the particular school. There were a whole list of safety issues that were identified, no working fire suppression system, electrical issues, heating and cooling issues, faulty lighting fixtures, plumbing problems, asbestos, structural cracks, extensive leaks and water damage, walls and ceiling tiles in need of repair and replacement, rotting boards, inoperable security lights, buckling sidewalls, and failure to comply with the nation's safety codes. And so when you look at the fact that we have been dealing with this and realizing that we have, there's a serious immediate need to address that problem, not only just with the modulars that have been replaced temporarily for that, but to build a permanent facility, which has been taking way too long for us to be able to do. And so I think that just as Chairwoman Ketchian, I think that, you know, there are processes that are in place that make it much more challenging and difficult for tribes to access funding and access our ability to move forward and address these issues in a timely manner because of maybe the federal process that is taking place. So I think that if we can figure out a way to make sure that the tribes are able to receive the funding, that the tribes are able to go ahead and direct themselves to be able to replace these facilities and have control over that, I think is much more beneficial.
Thank you, Chairman. And Chairman Yuvang Yoma, hopefully I said that correctly. Your testimony describes the arduous process the Hopi tribe has gone through to construct a safe, permanent detention facility. How did lack of federal investment in tribal infrastructure, specifically in BIA facilities, contribute to this unacceptably long process?
I'm going to start just sharing my frustration again. And thank you, Congressman Gallego, for that question. It's just something that we've been battling even pre my administration, and going back and forth on this. It really has hampered the progress because we have definite safety issues out here, and exercising our sovereignty, which we embrace. We did 638, our law enforcement, but not the detention portion. Obviously, because detention facility was still in disarray and condemnation, it created a lot of safety concerns for our community. And even today, we're still running into issues with those components. But overall, just, you know, the lack of the funding and the appropriation of the $5 million, the lack of oversight is really where it's really contributed to a lot of the problems that we've encountered. So as, you know, evidence in my testimony that, you know, that oversight time and time again, despite our outreach and the work that our congressional leaders had done to try to bring some attention to this, we still haven't received those appropriate answers. But the funding portion of it, it just really magnifies the situation that we're dealing with the health and safety of our community out here and the lack of funding for the detention facility.
Great. I believe I'm out of time, and thank you again, both of you, for testifying, and I hope to see you guys soon. I yield back my time.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Gallego. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Representative Soto.
Thank you again, Madam Chairwoman, for hosting this critical second panel with tribal leaders on the American Jobs Plan and improving health services, as well as Bureau of Indian Affairs facilities. Chairman Norris, what are some of the health services that the Sells Hospital is not able to provide due to its age and limited size?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. Much of the basic medical needs are really inadequate or unable to provide by the South Hospital. Just more specifically, the hospital does not provide telemetry beds for patients that require more intense monitoring. Operating rooms are not available. Anesthesia or MRIs are not available. The hospital cannot admit respiratory patients because there's no ventilator support. The nation also cannot routinely deliver babies due to the lack of anesthesia or an OBGYN specialist to back up the family physicians. Also, just wanted to mention that the Phoenix Indian Medical Center, which has been mentioned earlier, is another IHS facility for many of our Tohono Nation tribal members obtain health care from. It closed its labor and delivery services in August of 2020. This closure has left many of our nation's members without a reasonable option for maternity services. However, in December of 2020, response to an inquiry that was made from this subcommittee, IHS cited aging infrastructure and inadequate labor and delivery equipment as the primary reasons for the Phoenix Indian Medical Center discontinued these services. But the IHS also noted that it also indicated that 28.5 million of the necessary updates for PIMC are not currently funded, and that PIMC has been on the IHS facilities construction priority list since 2003. Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you, Chairman Norris. And how do you feel the nation's hospital held up throughout the coronavirus pandemic, and what challenges did this facility pose to the health and well-being of community members?
Well, it was a challenge, mainly because our current hospital here on the main reservation in South Arizona is built in the early 1960s, and it's still the same hospital that we use today. Although some renovations and upgrades have been done over the course of time, it really placed a challenge for us when this pandemic really hit our tribal community. We had to improvise. We had to bring in remote kinds of services, and we had to identify isolated areas that would be able to address the patients with COVID or potentially with COVID versus those that just needed medical services. So it was inadequate facility for us to be able to address effectively the pandemic. But granted, our medical staff, being the committed persons that they are and providing the services, were able to improvise and be able to create ways that we could still address the need while facing the challenges that we had physically, facilities wise, and short staff and so on and so forth. So thank you.
Thanks, and I yield the chair my remaining time. I think you had a question you wanted to ask before.
Thank you. I did want to ask the chair of the Hopi Tribe, with regards to the facility that you are seeking to build and need to build, how important is it to make sure that you have culturally relevant, culturally appropriate facility, as well as the ability to deal with withdrawal, substance abuse, substance use, and the medical, the medical conditions that need to be addressed because of that.
Thank you for that question, Chairwoman Ledger Fernandez. It is extremely important, and I think all across Indian country, we all feel the same way, to have some culturally appropriate treatment as part of the incarceration, because when you look at the overall picture, I think it's a common denominator and something that's shared across Indian country, and especially out here at Hopi. We don't just want to lock up our community members. We want to implement and get those components in place. Also, we have deep-rooted cultural and ceremonial beliefs here that a lot of the elders do carry forth with them, and being able to attribute that to part of the treatment is extremely important. Also connected to that are the social behavioral treatment that we would need as part of that facility. So consultation is extremely important in making sure that that is considered, and we have adequate areas in order to accommodate those kind of needs as well. We just don't want a detention facility. I don't want to give the wrong idea that we just want to create something with bars and put people behind them. It's extremely important that we craft this in a place where we can actually provide the treatment that our community members need as part of that process.
Thank you so very much, Chairman. I would now like to recognize the gentleman from Hawaii, Representative Case, Hawaii.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And first of all, to each and all of you, thank you so much for your testimony, and on behalf of the Native Hawaiians that I represent, the most Native Hawaiians in any congressional district in our country. In fact, I think it's probably one of the highest rates, if not the highest rates, of Indigenous peoples of any congressional district in our country. I just want to express my appreciation for our partnership in the Indigenous peoples of the United States. I think you all heard my questioning of Mr. Grinnell, which had to do with personnel to actually deliver services in addition to the facilities, of course. And Chair Kitcheon, I'll direct this to you, because in your testimony, you actually touched on this, and you mentioned that the Winnebago Police Department is chronically understaffed. And so I would assume that each of you would say that's true for all of the services that are provided, and for the reasons that I discussed with Mr. Grinnell. So directly to you, Chair, do you have a solution to that? I mean, I asked Mr. Grinnell whether there were models. He responded that one model was to follow the VA supplemental salary increase. Are there other ways that we might take a look at incentivizing professionals to serve in our Indian health services, and for that matter, in tribal organizations in a way that would, I guess, accomplish a couple of goals. Number one, to get good people. Number one, to retain them over time. And number three, I think, to incentivize Indigenous peoples to come home to provide those services. So can you just give me your thoughts on that?
Certainly, sir. Thank you for the question. And you really narrowed in on the root of the problem, and that is the recruitment and retention of the officers, because what happens in our community is our BIA officers are detailed to other reservations in our region that have maybe, to the decision makers in the agency that have a greater need than the Winnebago community. And so these federal officers get detailed for like 2 weeks at a time. And so that creates a greater stress on our tribal officers. There's morale problems. There's a strain on families that have to have their loved one go work North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, and it creates a gap in our services. And so finding ways to help tribes deputize officers so they can go to the academy, getting rid of those barriers that often are what we have discussions with our chief as, why is it so hard to get people to the academy? What can we do? And the chief has come up with some creative ways for the tribe to sponsor a handful of candidates to go to the academy, get trained, so we have a larger pool to select from. And it's just getting them through that pipeline and just to the academy seems to be a problem. And coupled with the detailing of our officers is a complete strain on our department. And if the program was fully funded and we had incentives like you had suggested, I think that would be helpful.
Do you have the, and apologies if I just kind of don't know the
It's hard.
intricacies of the legal relationships, but do you, the tribe, have the ability to independently hire and supplement salaries where that could be your choice to do if you chose to do it?
Yes, sir. We do that now. And the two tribally funded officers, I think I go back to that morale problem where they get not the best schedules. They work the oddest hours, and so we've got like this this PD with two classes of employees. If I guess I don't know if that's the best way to describe it, but it doesn't work, and it often leads to officers moving on.
I see. So the classes, as you put it, would be tribal officers that really result from your decisions, and then the officers that result from the IA's decisions. Is that right?
Right, because the agency is managed by the federal
And they're moving
BIA.
people around based on need and shortfall. So they've got a global view of it, and you've got your individual tribe view, and that creates these
Yes, sir.
differentiations. Okay, well, the 5 minutes of questions identified the problem, but not quite the solution. So hopefully to be continued. Thank you so
The
much.
solution is to stop detailing officers.
Okay, fair enough. That was a quick one. Thank you.
That was a quick one. Thank you so much, Representative Case and Chairwoman. I really want to thank all our witnesses, the administration witnesses, as well as the tribal leaders. I understand and know that you are pooled in many different ways in order to serve your people and serve your people well. And so we do appreciate the time that you have taken today to share with us your insights, to answer the questions, to show us the range from whether it's 100-year-old school at Hopi that has not been replaced to some of these very old health facilities, which impact both our health, they impact the health of your members, they impact the future of your members. We've also heard from many others. The subcommittee has been receiving input from others who said this is a very important issue. The Navajo Nation president has submitted issues, including noting that they helped author a white paper called Locked Up and Forgotten. I would like to enter that into the record, as well as the Broken Promises and the ProPublica BIE report. And this is a way of also reminding our members that if you have additional questions for the witnesses, we will ask the witnesses to respond to these in writing. Under Committee Rule 3.0, members of the committee must submit written questions within 3 business days following the hearing, and the hearing record will remain open for 10 business days for these responses. If there is no further business, without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.